All right, are we good?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Thanks for coming in to discuss today. And I wanted to talk about the Celtic collie and go a little bit into a couple of myths that to me suggest a deep and ancient tantric tradition within the old Celtic religion and within the Celtic mythology. And to me, when you put this all together, put this all out there, it is very fragmentary. It is very unclear in the sources we have. But when you put it together, I think it suggests some kind of tradition around the Finn McCool and this black hag that Gwyn or Finn confronts, that goes back to a shared root with the deities we consider the main tantric deities, who are Kali, Ma Kali, and Bhairava or Mahakala, or sometimes combined as Mahakala Bhairava. But there's a lot of different traditions about how that deity is named. So, first of all, to understand Kali a little bit, we can say that Kali, the name, points to her black color and associations with death and time. And what would you have to add about Kali and
So
the meaning of her name?
I mean, the modern Western perception of Kali is much different than like ancient Hindu, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, we can trade. There's actually more than just the black Kali. There's like a white Kali, a red Kali, a yellow Kali. Like there's a lot. But the black Kali is the most well known, and also
The most prominent. Yeah.
also probably has more ties to like the Vedic roots, because Kali is mentioned in the Vedas as one of the 7 tongues of Agni, and then like the 7 tongues obviously are like the 7 rays of like the color spectrum. But that's ultimately where she has her roots, and in the Devi Shuktam. So, yeah, that's
Right.
basically where our modern perception of Kali comes from. And it fits in line a lot with other depictions of like hags and European myth in general.
Right, great point. And she's very much described as terrifying in appearance, especially, and she is called upon only to take care of some very hard to kill, hard to defeat demons. She she has a terrifying look, but the heads that are strung around her neck as a necklace are the heads of demons. Is that correct?
Yes, in most traditions, yes, but like these heads symbolically represent the ego in like the deeper tantric tradition. But yeah, on the base level iconography, these are heads of demons and like heads of like
Right. Great point. So the main thing to underline is that her name does, it in a literal sense, it means blackness, I believe.
Death.
Or death, but it has these double meanings of death and time. But her dark color is extremely prominent, especially in the specific form, like you said. And she has a white form, which we'll come back to.
Yes.
And the other important thing is she is in. There are different ways, different versions of the story of how she's sort of emanated or comes about, but in at least one very prominent version, she is born from the forehead of Durga. Is that how it's told? She emerges. She bursts from the forehead of Durga. So in a way, she's in a sense she's born from Durga, but she is an emanation. She is a form of Durga.
And
I think there's other versions where Durga just becomes Kali, basically.
Her first major appearance appears in the Devi Mahatma. And Durga basically emanates like a bunch of different types of herself to fight the demon Raksha Bija. So there's also another form of the Durga who's like the epitome of the great Devi you hear about in the Devi Shuktam, that is very similar to Kali, but is somehow different. Like, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but Chamunda is her name, and she is literally almost always depicted as a hag. Kali is sometimes not depicted as a hag. Like, sometimes she's depicted as like young, but
right.
Yeah, Chamunda. She rides on a corpse, and she is always a hag. But she's very similar to Kali in iconography and even in the myth. She's like she drinks blood from like all the demons, and she has a garland of heads and arms. Just wanted to add that, and also like the origin of Kali as a goddess can also be traced to the Devi Mahatmya, which is insanely important for all the Hindu tantric goddesses.
Right. That's good. So that gives a basic idea of Kali. She is terrifying. She becomes too overwhelmingly destructive after, for example, defeating Raktabija, and also there's another version with a different demon. She goes on a rampage, and the gods can't subdue her essentially until Shiva steps in, and he lies down on the ground, and Kali steps on his chest, essentially. And depending on the version, there are a lot of ways this is interpreted and told, but she is sort of stopped in her tracks and subdued in one way or another by that action. And we'll go back to that. We can discuss that some more, but I want to just get into... Oh yeah, what did you want to add to that?
So like that story is specifically in the Puranic era. It's actually not in the Devi Mahatmya, I don't think, where Kali is subdued by Shiva. But in the Linga Purana, in the Vamana Purana, I think is where that happens. So,
okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Quote, her blackness represents that she is nirguna, beyond all qualities of nature and transcendent, unquote. From Wikipedia.
Yeah. So what I found is there are a couple of tales there's a tale in the Gaelic tradition and a tale in the Welsh tradition. Once you understand that Finn and Gwyn are the direct equivalents of Rudra Shiva, you can kind of look through their tradition of texts, and what we find is there are a couple of significant confrontations with hags. And these hags have certain features which, when looked at in this context, suggest a very similar type of story with potentially a similar meaning underlying it. So you kind of have to put them side by side, and when you put them side by side, they start to suggest this pattern. So in the Gaelic version, we have Finn McCool, and his men have to confront a hag or three hags. And let's also emphasize that Kali is often appearing in a grouping of other Kalis, or there are other matrikas. She's one of the matrikas. So she's often appearing in these multiple, like a multiplicity of Kalis, quote unquote, or
other
different echoes of that sort of, or other goddesses.
Same like force, if you want to call it that.
Exactly. And then in other traditions, you have the matrikas, you have the dakinis, and different things that are not quite the same. So and the yoginis.
Dakinis are very associated with Buddhism specifically. Dakinis are basically in the place of yoginis. Everywhere else in Hinduism, it's yoginis, but in Buddhism, they're dakinis, where dakinis in Hinduism are seen as like these horrible demons. And we'll get to that soon. But I just want to make that clear. Yoginis are like I would say, in my opinion, like it would be like the same place as a vulva or a witch in European lore.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are a couple of versions of this Gaelic story, and sometimes, well, actually, it's in general it's three sisters, and I believe there's one version where it's just the one main figure. So you can kind of see that triplicity of these three sisters still suggests this. There's this main core sister, um, and it is this sort of grouping that can be reminiscent of Kali and her kind of groupings. But um, I will read the text. This is called The Cave of Ceiscoran. Finn called for a great hunt one time on the plains of Moy-Connell and in the forest parts of Carbra of the Nuts, and he himself went up to the top of Ceiscoran, and his two dogs, Bran and Scalan, with him. And the Fianna were shouting through the whole country where they were hunting, the way the deer were roused in their wild places, and the badgers in their holes, and foxes in their wanderings, and birds on the wing. And Conaran, son of Imith, of the Tuatha had the sway in Ceiscoran at that time. And when he heard the shouting and the cry of the hounds all around, he bade his three daughters, that had a great share of enchantments, to do vengeance on Finn for his hunting. The three women went then to the opening of a cave that was in the hills, and there they sat down together, and they put three strong enchanted hanks of yarn on crooked holly sticks, and began to reel them off outside the cave. They were not long there till Finn and Conan came toward them, and saw the three ugly old hags at their work, their coarse hair tossed, their eyes red and bleary, their teeth sharp and crooked, their arms very long, their nails like the tips of cows' horns, and the three spindles in their hands. Finn and Conan passed through the banks of yarn to get a better look at the hags, and no sooner had they done that than a deadly trembling came on them, and a weakness, and the bold hags took hold of them and put them in tight bonds. Two other men of the Fianna came up then, and the sons of Menhan along with them, and they went through the spindles to where Finn and Conan were, and their strength went from them in the same way, and the hags tied them fast and carried them into the cave. They were not long there till Calcha and Lukid's son came to the place, and along with them the best men of the sons of Bashnia. The sons of Morna came as well, and no sooner did they see the hanks than their strength, their bravery, went out of them, the same as it went from the others. And in the end, the whole number of them, gentle and simple, were put in bonds by the hags and brought into the cave. And there began, at the mouth of the cave, a great outcry of hounds calling for their masters that had left them there. And there was lying on the hillside a great heap of deer and wild pigs and hares and badgers, dead and torn, that were brought as far as that by the hunters that were tied up now in the cave. Then the three women came in, having swords in their hands, to the place where they were lying, to make an end of them. But first they looked out to see, was there ever another man of the Fianna to bring in and make an end of with the rest? And they saw coming towards them a very tall man that was Goll, son of Morna, the flame of battle. And when the three hags saw him, they went to meet him, and they fought a hard battle with him, and great anger came on Goll. And he made great strokes at the witches, and at the last he raised up his sword, and with one blow he cut the two that were nearest him through and through. And then the oldest of the three women wound her arms about Goll, and he beheading the two others, and he turned to face her, and they wrestled together, till at last Goll gave her a great twist and threw her to the ground. He tied her fast then with the straps of a shield, and took his sword to make an end of her. But the hag said, O champion that was never worsted, strong man that never went back in battle, I put my body and my life under the protection of your bravery, and it is better for you, she said, to get Finn and the Fianna safe and whole than to have my blood. And I swear by the gods my people swear by, she said, I will give them back to you again. With that, Goll set her free, and they went together into the hill where the Fianna were lying. And Goll said, "Loose off the fastenings first from Fergus the True Lips, and from the other learned men of the Fianna, and after that from Finn and Oisin, and the 29 sons of Morna, and from all the rest." She took off the fastenings then, and the Fianna made no delay, but rose up and went out and sat down on the side of the hill. And Fergus of the Sweet Lips looked at Goll, son of Morna, and made great praises of him, and of all that he had done. And that's the end of that. And there is another...
Oh, sorry.
There's another version. I was just going to say there's another version where Goll actually beheads the final sister as well. And her name is Irnan or Iron, which are versions of the word for iron, like Irnan. So yeah, that's an interesting point to come back to, that the primary one's name means iron. But yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, and iron is actually typically like it turns black, like
exactly. Sometimes it's referred to as a black metal or things like that.
Yeah.
Shyama Ayas, Syamaayas, is a Sanskrit term that refers to iron and means black metal, also called Krishna Ayas, with the same meaning. Josephus informs me that this is just like Latin aes nigrum, Aesnigrum, a Latin term for steel, aes indeed being a perfect formal match for Sanskrit ayas. So this naming has very deep Indo-European roots and could be reflected in Irnan's name, thus relating her to the metal that was called black.
But I've never actually heard the myth with Irnan. The description of the witches there is like eerily similar to how Kali and Chamunda are both described at times.
Exactly.
Like holding the swords. That's the thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Kali holds like
Good
a
point.
sacrificial sword in all of her iconography.
Wow. I hadn't even caught that. Yeah, that's a great point.
Quote, "The curved driguk knife in her right hand shows her power to cut the continuum of the delusions and obstacles of her followers and of all living beings. Drinking the blood from the kapala in her left hand symbolizes her experience of supreme bliss." Unquote. This is a depiction of the Buddhist Vajrayogini, also called Krodi Kali, the fierce Kali or the fierce black one.
And then obviously she's always carrying a severed head on top of the heads she has in her garland, right? She's always carrying a severed head of a demon and dripping the blood into the bowl as an offering. And that's another tie-in with the blood is,
Quote, "Two of these hands, usually the left, are holding a sword and a severed head. The sword signifies divine knowledge, and the human head signifies human ego, which must be slain by divine knowledge in order to attain moksha." Unquote. This is a description of Dakshina Kali.
And obviously, one of the most significant things is the magic that they use is based around spindles, using woven yarn spindles that they somehow create a sort of magical net that just drains the power and strength from anyone who comes near it. So yeah, we'll come back to the spindles and this sort of weaving magic.
Darn.
Later on. What were you gonna say?
Oh, okay. I'll just say it. But this the hag writing, this phenomenon in Europe, especially with like sleep paralysis, where like you would have a nightmare, right? It was usually depicted, or the concept of a succubus, right? It was usually depicted as a hag riding you and like stealing your energy away. And then like with the spindles and stuff like that, that goes back to Seether in Norse, and I'm sure in Celtic, was often involved tying knots and stuff like that and weaving things. Obviously Frigga with her distaff. is
Yes, exactly.
Fates of Man. But
and let's go to that. Let's save that for when we talk. We will go to the Germanic stuff, and of course, Spindle Holla. Just keep that name in mind. But yeah, and then of course, just the description of the three ugly old hags. Their coarse hair tossed, their eyes red and bleary, their teeth sharp and crooked, their arms very long, their nails like the tips of cows' horns, and three spindles in their hands. So just that description of the hags. It calls to mind Collin. And there's a version written like in the 19th, it's either the end of the 19th century or early 20th century. And it seems to me, and also to Bowen, who has looked at this, it's probably like a later literary elaboration on, they've added fluff, they've added descriptions and stuff. But strangely, in that version, the hags are described as black. So who knows if was something from a real tradition, or if it was just it just came to the writer's inspiration that they should be black as he added to the story. I'm not sure.
Did anybody of note write that, or is that just random?
I think it's the last name is Stevens. He's a well-known Celtic tale sort of gatherer and rewriter.
Okay.
But let's see.
I was about to say if that was
I think it's
I believe it.
It's he was like a guy right along with Yeats.
Okay.
He may have been an associate of Yeats. I'm not sure about that. But let me see here. I'm gonna find this because I'm on the page here where it is. But okay, so James Stevens, and you can look him up.
Okay.
I'll just read his little description here. Their hair was black as ink and tough as wire. It stuck up and poked out and hung down about their heads in bushes and spikes and tangles. Their eyes were bleary and red. Their mouths were black and twisted. And in each of these mouths, there was a hedge of curved yellow fangs. They had long, scraggy necks that could turn all the way around like the neck of a hen. Their arms were long and skinny and muscular. Bodies were covered with a bristle of hair and fur and fluff, so that they looked like dogs in some parts and like cats in others. They had mustaches poking under their nose and woolly wads growing out of their ears. If you had to look at them a second time, you were likely to die of the sight. They were called Cavog, Collin, and Irnan, and the fourth daughter, Irnach. So that's another variation. Let's see. But yeah, so you can kind of get a sense from that how much it feels like a late sort of literary elaboration. I think you can kind of tell.
The original story.
Embellishment, that's the word. And so you can look into that and see if that has any basis, because there are some details even of the names that they don't match the other version that I just read. So did he have another source, another folk source that he was drawing some of the details from? I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely a late version. Yeah, so let me just grab the Welsh version here. And all right, I'm gonna post this in the chat. And would you like to read this one here?
Oh, sure. I will destroy every name.
All right, go for it whenever you're ready.
Okay, it starts with someone saying something. So, said Arthur, is there any one of these is there any one of the marvels yet unobtained? Said one of his men, there is, the blood of the witch Orddu, the daughter of the witch Orwen, of Pen Nant Govid, on the confines of hell. Arthur set forth towards the north and came to the place where was the witch's cave. And Gwynab Nud and Gwythyr, the son of Graidwall, counseled him to... Oh my god, I can't read that. Counseled him to send Cakamwir... Do you have any idea how to pronounce that?
Just go for it. Just Cakamwiri, I don't know.
Cakamwiri and Haigwid his brother, to fight the witch, and a lot of sentences start with "and" here. And as they entered the cave, the witch seized upon them, and she caught Haigwyd by the hair of his head. That's a good collie match there, and threw him on the floor beneath her. And Cacamwiri caught her by the hair of her head and dragged her to the earth from off of Haigwyd. But she turned again upon them both and drove them both out with kicks and with cuffs. And Arthur was wroth at seeing his two attendants almost slain, and he sought to enter the cave, but Gwyn and Gwythyr said unto him, "It would not be fitting or seemly for us to see the squabbling hag." All right, I'm going to retry that one, maybe edit that out. "It would not be fitting or seemly for us to see thee squabbling with a hag. Let Hiram-Ru and Hiradel go to the cave." So they went, but if great was the trouble of the first two that went, much greater was of these two. And heaven knows that not one of the four could move from the spot until they placed them all upon Lamrai, Arthur's mare. And then Arthur rushed to the door of the cave, and at the door he struck at the witch with Carnwenan, his dagger, and clove her in twain, cut her in half, I assume, so that she fell in two parts. Yeah. And Caw of North Britain took the blood of the witch and kept it. Okay. So, obviously the paralysis there is the same.
Yes. So there are a few things I want to point to. So, first of all, this is placed in the context of the Arthurian tradition. So Arthur takes the main role here, rather than, as we see, Finn McCool and Goll. Arthur kind of takes a little bit of the main role from Finn and a little bit of the main role from Goll. As you can see, Arthur steps in at the end and slays her, just like Goll steps in at the end. They are in a quest to obtain her blood as well, which is a detail that the other one doesn't have. Also, importantly, Orddu, the name of the name of this hag, Orddu, it means the very black. It just literally means the very black. And her mother Orwen, her name means the very white. So the name Orddu could very directly match the name of Collin specifically. And then we have a couple of details. Like you said, the paralysis, it's exactly the same as, they're a sequence of the men who are sent in and they're paralyzed, just as a bunch of the Fianna men are sent in and paralyzed. They can't move from the spot. It even says here that, like you said, catching by the hair of the head is reminiscent of Kali, but also she, throws him, what does it say? Threw him on the floor beneath her. I mean, that's, at least as an image, it's similar to Shiva going on the floor, literally beneath Kali. Like that's, literally.
The difference we see is that
image.
Kali is portrayed as a positive figure, right? That's like the only
absolutely
difference I see with these types.
Yes, no, you're right, and I think that's just coming down as the tale enters. There are thousands of years of how this tale
evolved in Hindu,
transformed, and became kind of simplified, I think, and became part of a literary tradition by the time it's written down. It's become, it falls into this trope of the hag. I just think, you have to look underneath that at the sort of esoteric wink that it's giving you, to see behind sort of she's become a trope of a standard just hag who's only negative, but that's not really the whole story of what's underlying that. Yeah.
If we look at every other,
you look at all the other stuff
and see
exactly.
Hags, like it does have
an
esoteric significance, at least a little bit.
But this is a great point though as well, because actually, Orddu is being born from Orwen, the very white. There's nothing negative about Orwen as far as we know. And Orwen her name is very close to Ceridwen and Olwen. Olwen is another version of Ceridwen, in this, in the same way that Vach equals Saraswati. So we have this in the Welsh version because Olwen, she's in the position of Ethnia Enya from the Irish version, or Gunlod. So basically Gunlod, we know Gunlod, that myth, where Odin has to sleep with Gunlod and go into the giant's fortress. In the Welsh version, the same position is being taken by Olwen. So that suggests to us that she's the same as Ethnia and Gunlod, and that's the Saraswati version. It's like the sort of specified or lower emanation of Vach as the waters of the cosmic river, or the divine river.
And you could say like it's the more sattvic, pure white version. Of more emanation. And then you have like the other deities like Kali taking on the more tamasic, androgasic, or passionate and dark rules of Vach.
Yeah, very much. And so I just want to point to this pattern of names where we know Ceridwen. She's terrifying, but she's also clearly positive as well. She's a source of inspiration, and she has this position that's more both-sided. And then we have Olwen, Olwen, and then we have Orwen. So nothing is spelled out for you, but there's a very heavy suggestion that Orwen and Olwen could be just continuous, different names of the same goddess with a slightly different name. So that suggests that this Orddu doesn't necessarily have, a fully negative, genealogy, lineage, at least, that she's coming from. And the other thing I'll say is in the Irish version, it's even more explicitly said that these three witches are members of the Tuatha Dé Danann. So the Tuatha Dé Danann are the gods, the good gods. Their father is one of the Tuatha Dé Danann, so they are just Tuatha Dé Danann. So that's a strange detail that I think points to this remnant of their positive side. They are born out of, they are among the deities, clearly placed, and then all of a sudden they're hags. So that doesn't fit together in our simple trope. Look at it. So that tells you there's something underneath.
So it makes sense because you have the same thing in Germanic, like with the demonization of like heroic figures specifically. Like a lot of berserkers got demonized, and witches got demonized later on in like Icelandic stuff, and you don't see that in like the Poetic Edda or the Prose Edda. It's a similar type of thing that goes on there.
Yeah, exactly. The more it gets into sort of just detached from its religious earlier tradition, as that becomes Christianized, as it becomes just sort of commodified as folk tales or whatever, what have you. Things get simplified, and becomes just a one-dimensional hag where there was clearly more previously. But the only other thing I wanted to say was, just specifically, the men couldn't move from the spot until they placed him on the mare, so that it's very underlined that the men can't move until there's an intervention, and then
we could make a parallel. Sorry to interrupt though, but we can make a parallel that Shiva laying down and Kali stepping on him and like realizing like not being able to destroy her own husband, right? Is something to do with the masculine, like Rudraic figure being immutable, or stanau, or like the pillar that cannot be moved at all, right? So,
quote, a common interpretation is that Shiva symbolizes Purusha, the universal, unchanging aspect of reality, or pure consciousness. Kali represents Prakriti, nature or matter, sometimes seen as having a feminine quality of creation of life. The merging of these two qualities represents ultimate reality. A similar tantric interpretation sees Shiva as consciousness and Kali as power or energy. Consciousness and energy are dependent upon each other, since Shiva depends on Shakti, or energy, in order to fulfill his role in creation, preservation, and destruction. In this view, without Shakti, Shiva is a corpse, unable to act." Unquote. From Wikipedia. They are thus seen as inseparable in reality and only a match for one another.
Yes, absolutely. So that gets to the deeper esoteric meaning of, once again, we're getting a superficial sort of telling of what happened in these Celtic versions. They were paralyzed, quote unquote, but there's deeper layers that you start to see once you put things side by side, which it could still have underlying this paralysis could be this this deeper meaning of the immovable nature of that Finn or Gwyn type. But the other thing that ties the Celtic and Welsh, the Gaelic and Welsh versions together, is that line where Gwyn and Gwythyr said unto Arthur, "It would not be fitting or seemly for us to see thee squabbling with a hag. Let him Hiram Rue and Hiredil go to the cave." So the same thing actually happens in another version of the Irnan, the Finn and Irnan and Goll myth, which is the one, you'll find it on the Wikipedia page of Irnan. It's summarized there that Finn's men tell him it wouldn't be fitting for you to fight with a hag, and therefore in that version, that's why they send Goll to do the fight. So you can see that
Goll's like more transgressive nature, right? Because like Bhairava
absolutely
is associated with more transgressive acts. He's more of a Rudra, who's in this like wrathful state. He can dwell. He can screw with the hag, but not Shiva or Finn in that case.
Yes, yeah, precisely. So that's good. Yeah. So that I just wanted to show that really ties the two stories together, even though there's some differences with these two stories. It's a confrontation. Gwyn is taking kind of a more backseat in the Welsh version because Arthur is just this more prominent literary figure at that point, I think. And so Gwyn is sitting back a little bit, but he's there. He's still the other main figure with Arthur, kind of like Finn is paired with Goll. And then Arthur takes on that final role that Goll would take on. So it's just a literary substitution of Arthur there, I think, pretty clearly. And then, like you said, this shows this concept that, well, we know from the other comparisons that we've discussed that Goll and Finn are just two sides of one deity on the divine level, so to speak. And so for some reason, like you mentioned, this other side, this more transgressive side, is having to be called in to take on this battle. And that's what that also underlines there. So this gets to the parallel of who Goll could be, because I think it's very easy to just, the first reaction would be to say that Goll is like Rudra and Finn is like Shiva. But I think this is a mistake that, if somebody were to think this, it wouldn't be the end of the world, right? It gets the idea across that Goll is more Rudra-like in this story, at least. Finn is more Shiva-like in this story. But we want to be as precise as possible, I think. And so I think the tradition, the story is trying to tell us a little bit more. And there's a different division that's actually being portrayed here, which is that Finn is always, in all his mythology, Finn is always taking on Rudra roles and Shiva roles. He is Rudra Shiva in total, in himself. And Goll is really another more terrifying form of the Rudra Shiva totality. Like he's not just one face like Rudra versus Shiva. He is also Rudra Shiva in full, but a more intensified, a more transgressive version. So there are different names for that, like Ugra. Ugra is one of the names of Rudra Shiva that just means terrible. And it actually parallels the name Iger of Odin.
Here I should have more correctly pronounced the Norse name as Uger, as in Yggdrasil, which would bring the Vedic Ugra and Norse Uger even closer together.
So like Yggdrasil, Igr is a title of Odin, and then Yggdrasil, the tree, is connected to Odin by that title, and it means the same thing from the same root. So that could be potentially connected to the same sort of emanation. But then there's an even more fleshed out and specified form of Shiva called Bhairava, and Bhairava, kind of overlaps with Ugra, I think, in some sense. The way the lines are drawn, there's never a full distinction. It's sort of categorization of Shiva's forms. But one interesting thing on that, can I just let me just say this one thing? So Bhairava, before we fully describe him, Bhairava is given manifestation by Shiva, but then at one point Bhairava kind of goes against Shiva's wishes by subduing the devas. Okay, so that already shows kind of this conflict between those two sides, even though they're one and the same ultimately. That's very similar to Goll and Finn, I think. Suddenly, Bhairava is going against the wishes of Shiva, so to speak, and he subdues the devas, and then Shiva turns him into a tree. So to me, that's very odd, and it comes back. I just wanted to tie that to the idea of Ugra and Yggdrasil, the tree Yggdrasil. It's named for this terrifying epithet of Odin himself. So could there be some continuity of Bhairava being turned into the tree, and Igr, who is equivalent of Ugra, the terrible, being to the tree? And then Bhairava basically means the same thing as Ugra, like it basically means the terrible or frightful. Exactly. So it's just another synonym of that. And what were you going to say?
So I was going to get to, I was going to explain like Bhairava, but there's many different Bhairavas, and there's a traditional variation as well, but you can plainly see that they're like the Bhairavas as like a whole make up like this, basically make up a Fianna, or they make up like a Mannerbund, or whatever you want to call it, really, or like this war band. Like the Bhairavas often are kind of like Rudras in the Vedas. There's 8 in some traditions, and there's a lot of them you can go through, but specifically, I would also like to talk about Vatuka Bhairava, which is this young form of Bhairava with he has dogs, which are yogis who make it so far that they become Vatuka Bhairava's dogs, and he's always portrayed as like an Ephebe, or like a really young version of Rudra.
Yeah, he's basically the child. He's basically the child version of Bhairava.
Yeah, basically like an Apollonic version of Bhairava. So we have the same distinction between old Cronus and young Apollo. But like I said, I just it's hard not to see all of the different Bhairavas as parts of a Mannerbund or something like that in that sense. And then the main myth associated with Bhairava is Shiva hears Brahma talking about how Brahma is just as good as Shiva, because they both have 5 heads, I think, is the main reason. And Shiva takes a piece of his hair and throws it, and it becomes Bhairava, who then decapitates one of Brahma's heads, making him 4-headed. And he wanders around as an ascetic, after having destroyed Brahma's ego, with his skull as a cup. And
Shiva does. Or
Bhairava.
Bhairava does, sorry. Right. Bhairava, but then it's interesting. It seems like in his wandering version where he's doing penance with the skull cup, it seems like that merges into just Shiva himself. I mean, I know they are one, but in the telling, am I misremembering that or misunderstanding that? It's not like Bhairava's off wandering and Shiva's doing his own thing, right? Or if it seems like Shiva sometimes then just gets then Shiva just gets called, the one with the skull cup and stuff like that.
I think it just ultimately comes down to it's a story portraying a specific principle rather than
absolutely.
So Shiva's always the ascetic, right? But Bhairava is this transgressive one who decapitates and
Right.
walks around with a skull cup like in a gory, like he does the transgressive acts, right? That's what his place is supposed to be.
Exactly. So I think this is like the paradigmatic myth of Bhairava, and it's the paradigmatic myth that sets this pattern, like you said, of Bhairava is the more terrible, the more transgressive one, who Shiva has to call essentially or emanate to do the violence, especially the beheading, and that's exactly where Goll steps in the myth of Goll and Finn here. So Finn becomes the immovable or unmoving, paralyzed one at the feet of the hag, essentially in her cave, and at that point, Goll essentially appears. It's almost like he's been summoned. He just appears at that moment because he is stepping in as the other side of Finn here, as the one who has to take on that fight. And that's, like I said, that's spelled out even more in the other version on the Wikipedia, which I don't have the root source of that actually, but it's on the Wikipedia. You can just look at it there. That it's spelled out even more. That Finn's men tell him, it wouldn't be fitting for you to do this. Goll should take your place and do it, essentially. And Goll steps in as taking the place of Finn because he's the other side of him, who is more terrible, and who does the violence. And it's literally beheading once again.
And also,
and then along with,
okay, yeah. Also, in like this fits in with like even on the theological basis of like Shaivism, because you have like Shiva in his highest form is the one who begets Bhairava, it's implied, but like specific names for that go to like Mahakala. Mahakala is the one outside of time, right? He doesn't move, like he's immutable. He doesn't do anything in this world except like just think of it, right? So when you have Bhairava being the acting, like the actor in these stories, it's very telling because Shiva isn't doing anything. It's Bhairava who is the acting force in these myths, and that's a pretty standard theological concept as well, as like that. Ultimately, Mahakala or Shiva is like immutable. And that's actually the basis of many of his stories, is that trying to get him out of his yogic self-absorption. Bhairava being the acting principle really tells you something about like how close the theologies like can still line up.
Yeah, exactly. It seems so well aligned in this, even in these traces of this Celtic version, and even Gwyn in the Welsh version is totally sitting back while Arthur does the rest in the same way. And then
in the Saru Purana, Vishnu's form Narasimha makes the Matrikas to kill the demon Andhaka, and then Shiva emanates Bhairava to kill Andhaka after Narasimha is unable to do so. This shows Bhairava as the one summoned by Shiva to slay a demon, but it also connects to other variants where the Kali-associated Matrikas also appear and have to be subdued. Meanwhile, in Kumara Purana, the Bhairavas are formed to help defeat this Andhaka, and it is they who then ask Narasimha to subdue the rampaging Matrikas. So the Bhairavas are the cause of the subduing of the females here, but indirectly. In Pranatoshini Tantra, attributed to Svatantra Tantra, it is recounted that Shiva and his consort Chandika, identified with Parvati, were engrossed in coitus when she became enraged. Her attendants Dakini and Varnini rose from her body. Upon seeing the pale form of Parvati, Chinnamasta, Shiva in turn became infuriated and assumed the form of Krodha Bhairava. And this version is retold in the Shakta Samgama Tantra. So this is a version where Parvati Chandika becomes a more furious form upon becoming enraged with Shiva, and Shiva must become his own terrible form, Krodha Bhairava, in response to match Parvati's terrible form. According to Manish Kamesra, Quote, in Mahabharata, the Matrikas are described as bad-tempered, frightening, and ferocious. They are described as fatal, wild, with inauspicious demeanors, who are a threat to fetuses or infants. The Matrikas live on trees, crossroads, caves, and funeral grounds. They are described as terrible as well as beautiful. Unquote. There is also a tradition of tantric paintings where Shiva is lying on the ground, like in the legend where he stops Dakshina Kali, but Bhairava is emanating from him and copulating with Kali on top of Shiva, or Bhairava is sometimes underpinning Shiva. This shows the same sort of pattern, with Kali, Shiva, and Bhairava together, Shiva, the immobile one, and Bhairava, the one who is directly, actively engaging and matching the fierce power of Kali. Since the sexual act and the violent confrontation between these deities are well established as two sides of one coin in this tantric tradition, Bhairava matching Kali in sexual union can be seen as a double image of him as her match in violent force. In this way, the esoteric meaning of these paintings can indeed be seen to parallel Goll Mac Morna matching and overcoming Irnan, while Finn lies immobilized on the floor of her cave. That violent confrontation can be seen as a double image of the sexual congress depicted in the tantric paintings. Chinnamasta is a form associated with Kali, who is a goddess who severs her own head and then gives her blood to be drunk. Meanwhile, other forms of the terrible goddesses often hold cups of blood. So the giving of blood or holding a cup of blood by this type of goddess could be similar to when Gwyn and Arthur go to retrieve the blood of Orddu. The blood is held by this goddess and is shown to be sacred and must be taken or given by the tantric seeker. Now it is traditional practice for tantrics to go to cremation grounds to confront Kali at night and face her terrible form, with hope of receiving some benefit from doing so. This often involves particular tantric rituals involving blood being performed. Perhaps this confronting of Kali could parallel Goll or Bhairava matching the fierceness of Irnan or Kali and the other terrible goddess forms, or, again, the retrieval of Orddu's blood. One anonymous blog post I read summarized this simply as, quote, to invite Kali in, you must become Bhairava, unquote. And this goes along with the tantric concept that Kal Bhairava's consort is Kali. They are the match for one another.
But there is also a Buddhist version of a story about the wrathful deity Mahakala. And you just mentioned Mahakala as Shiva, the unmoving. But there are other traditions. The name Mahakala, I think, gets used and
I can explain
change. And you can explain that in every version. So, for example, I was listening to Rajarshi Nandi, who's a Hindu Shaivite Tantric. He worships Bhairava. And he was saying that ultimately, he was describing how Mahakala and Bhairava are one, of course. And so what that exactly means can be interpreted differently.
The Tantric sadhak Rajarshi Nandi asserts that, quote, Mahakala is highest form of Bhairava, is time personified, unquote. His interviewer then asks, it is a Bhairava? And he responds, quote, yes, Mahakal Bhairava, unquote. He goes on to say, quote, Mahakala Bhairava is the consort of Dakshina Kali. The only being that is more intense than Mahakala is Kali, but to reach her, you will need his blessings. He's the one who sees the mantras of Kali and gives them to the world, unquote. This makes me wonder if the mantras of Kali could be compared again to the blood or essence of Orddu that the seekers are in quest of in the Welsh version. Scholar Stella Cromrish explains the relationship between Mahakala and Kal Bhairava similarly, describing how one becomes the other thus, Quote, Pralaya is the cosmic homology of absolute transcendental time, Kala in the highest heaven, or Mahakala before the descent of time into the world. At the end of the time world, Kalagni Rudra, the fire that is time and annihilation, becomes Mahakala. As the last flame of Kalagni flares up, it expires in Mahakala. In that instant, Kalagni becomes and is Bhairava, in a leap from the dissolution of the cosmos into the metaphysical realm. The dissolution of the cosmos takes place in what had been manifestation. Its annihilation is but an image of transcendency, a homology of the uncreate. In the leap from the annihilation of the cosmos to the metaphysical realm or transcendency, Kalagni becomes Bhairava. His explicit name is Kala Bhairava, see Kurma Purana 2.31.71 and 30. Because even Kala, time, fears him, he is called Kala Bhairava. See Shiva Purana 3.8.47. Or Kala Raja, the Lord of Kala, Shiva Purana 3.8.46. Bhairava is a form of Shiva, Shiva Purana 3.8.60. More than that, Bhairava is Shiva's integral form. The breakthrough from time into timelessness is the mysterium tremendum of Shiva Bhairava. It is the restitution of timelessness, as it was before the beginning, the timelessness of the uncreate. Bhairava is the integral Rudra at the instant of the breakthrough from time, Kala, into the timeless immensity, Mahakala, of the uncreate. Bhairava is Shiva at his most fearful. He is Shiva entire, whether spoken of as emanated from Shiva or seen on the highest level of Shiva as Mahadeva Kala Bhairava, the great god Kala Bhairava. Bhairava is the complete form of Shiva. Fools deluded by Shiva's Maya do not know him. Shiva Purana 3.8.2. Bhairava, the Kala Purusha, time who controls everything. Kurma Purana 2.31.29 and 45. While Kala and Kalagni are degrees of Rudra in manifestation, at its end and beyond manifestation, Kala alone has a witness and victim in every living being. Releasing his clutch on life as Kalagni in a consuming blaze of self-ignition, his metamorphosis is the metaphysical fulfillment of time as Mahakala, eternity. The mythical figure of Mahakala is Bhairava. Let me repeat that. The mythical figure of Mahakala is Bhairava. The hierarchy of time within Lord Shiva is acted out in the myth of Bhairava. The myth shows the overcoming of temporality that has its image in Kala, the god who is time and death, gorging himself on the bodies of the living. As such, Kala is committed to an act of continuous destruction, eon after eon. The Lord Kalagni Rudra, the highest Lord, the seed of the universe, the fire of annihilation. Quote, whose form is time and who has no form, unquote. Kurma Purana 1.28.48, reduces everything to ashes and merges the self in his own self. Kurma Purana 2.44.2 through 3. Rudra overcame time as Mahakala. He became Bhairava in his breakthrough from time into timelessness. Kala, time, consumes itself and becomes Mahakala, absolute time or timelessness, unquote. That is from Stella Kramersh's The Presence of Shiva, which is highly, highly recommended.
So what I'm saying is there can be traditions where Mahakala is taking on the exact position as Bhairava, despite what we were just saying, where Mahakala can also symbolize that which is outside of time. Mahakala can also be conflated with the Bhairava position. Okay, so it's just complicated. That's just how these traditions run.
Mahakala. So Buddhist Mahakala, you could see it as the version of the Tantrics Shiva not tamed by Buddhism per se. There's also a myth where Mahakala turns into Avalokiteshvara, which is the main. The Dalai Lama is an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, for example. Like he's like the head deity almost of the Buddhist tradition. But Mahakala is like this smaller deity who represents Shiva, who's like untamed by Buddhism. Whereas in Shaivism, Mahakala is like the ultimate, like Ion or Cronus in Greek.
Exactly.
So there's
exactly. So the context, the tradition matters for what the name exactly means. So, so what I'm suggesting here in this little comparison is that at least this Mahakala in this Buddhist context, which is a very different context from the Hindu, that this myth, at least under this name, could go back to the Bhairava type myth, because they have this connection, and the names can be used differently in different contexts. So, in East Asian Buddhism, the Dakinis are mainly known they're mainly known. So this is an important story for them via the story of their subjugation by the wrathful deity Mahakala, found in a commentary on the Mahavairochana or Vairochana Tantra, also known as the Vairochana Bisambodhi Sutra by the Tang Dynasty monk Yi Xing. According to the story, the Buddha Vairochana, wishing to stop the Dakinis from preying on humans, took the form of Mahakala, summoned the Dakinis before him, and then swallowed them all, declaring that he would release them on the condition that they cease devouring human flesh. So, again, this is just a fragment with some caveats here and some changes for sure. But it gives the idea that, so if Vairochana represents the position of Shiva as sort of a Buddhist, would you say that Vairochana can be connected to downstream of a Shiva concept in this sense, the Buddha Vairochana? How would you?
Buddhism, you have a common thing where Buddhas emanate the deities. It's like reversed. So instead of deities emanating like yogis and like that, where the deities are put on the pedestal, you have it reversed in Buddhism. Vairochana is probably seen as like the. Usually, you see Manjushri as the one emanating the Shiva analogs, but and I think it's in this is like in East Asian Buddhism as well. It might be changed.
Exactly.
So it's
So once again,
deities. In that case.
Yeah. So, but in terms of the way they've interchanged, where they've replaced this Vairochana Buddha could be taking the position that in the Hindu tradition would be taken by Shiva. He is this Buddha who's wishing to stop the Dakinis, and figures like Vairochana and Manjushri, they are in these equivalent deific positions. They're not just humans. They're not just.
I'm reading right here that he's associated with the primordial Buddha, quote unquote, the Adi Buddha, which is often basically just like a carbon copy of Shiva.
Exactly. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, we are talking about Buddhism. It's we're looking at it in a comparative lens. So people can disagree with this comparison, of course. But we are arguing, it's our argument that this, in terms of these tales, that you can make this comparison. And what it would show is this figure who's in a position similar or equivalent to Shiva in the other in Hindu tradition. He is having to take the form of Mahakala, who is, of course, an even more obvious name of Shiva, and has this connection to Bhairava. And specifically in this tale, he's being summoned to subdue Dakinis who are rampaging and swallowing or devouring human flesh. Okay, so this is even more clearly some hag-like figures, female figures who are, it's more similar to the Irnan myth, I think, in that particular piece. Would you say that the Dakinis here,
like, what were they planning on doing with Finn and the gang after they killed them? I mean, it was
make an end of them.
Yeah. Like, it was probably something along the lines of using their organs for some sort of witchy thing. You could definitely tie them with Dakinis, who are these like flesh-eating demons.
Yes, exactly. And Dakinis, Matrikas, it all kind of it is well aligned with Kali and and her groupings, even though it's sort of, there are differences within different traditions. It's well aligned, I would say, as just like Vairochana is well aligned with the position of Shiva and Mahakala, as it just it reinforces this general pattern that there is this one form, Vairochana, associated with the absolute form of the Buddha, and then he has to take another form, right? That will do the sort of dirty work of subduing these demonic or hag-like female forces. So it's very similar. When you add that together with the other possible parallels, such as the Bhairava beheading Brahma, it begins to paint this pattern that there is this concept where the Shiva type needs to take on or summon this more destructive, more terrible form to do this specific type of thing, including beheading, including subduing the hag-like females. And then that ties back into the myth where Shiva subdues Kali just by him stepping on her. Her stepping on him.
Just something else to probably like tie back into the Buddhism thing. Like if you ask a Shaivite what state does a Buddha achieve, and it's probably going to be the state of Shivahood, right? They become Shiva because they've reached this state of equanimity and like emptiness. So you could say that a self-realized like Buddha, like Vairochana, is in the state of Shiva already. So him emanating himself as Mahakala is probably just another form of Shiva, like making Bhairava.
Yeah, and like it says in this little summary, it's in this context, Mahakala is considered a wrathful form. He's the wrathful deity Mahakala in that. So that's what's important, I think, is it's whatever wrathful name they have in their tradition, that's what's coming into form here. Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, anything else to add on that?
Nope.
Okay. So the other thing with Bhairava is he's described as that which burns away or dissolves. If you look at the encyclopedia entry on Wisdom Lib, that is his description. He also has an epithet. He has the epithet Citra Banu, Citrabhanu. Citra Banu, Chitra Banu means beautiful light, and it is just a figure of speech meaning fire, though. So it when it's used, it's understood to mean fire specifically. Goll Mac Morna, his birth name is Aeth, fire, A-E-D, A-E-D, fire, the Irish word that just literally means fire. So Bhairava has a very emphasized fire aspect. He's what burns away in this terrible sense. In the story that I read, he's called the Flame of Battle, apparently. Goll is called the Flame of Battle, and Goll has this name, fire. So let's see what else.
Also, I would like to add one of the there are many forms of Bhairava, obviously, and I think there's even a Kala Bhairava, which is like the Great Time Bhairava, like the closest to Mahakala. But there's also different epithets for Shiva used in the context of like this Bhairava tradition. In Kashmiri Shaivism, you have the Vijnan Bhairava Tantra, and Kal Agni Rudra is a name used that is synonymous with Bhairava, and he's the one who burns the entire cosmos down eventually.
Right, true. So that once again just underlies, we know, of course, Rudra himself is identifiable with Agni or overlapping with Agni, but even more, Bhairava has these epithets literally meaning fire and being, even this more fierce fire connection, Kal Agni Rudra. And then Goll has the name literally meaning fire, so that kind of underlies that.
If you break down
yeah,
Agni Rudra, it means like death, or great time. Like it's like supposed to be like the it's supposed to be like the cosmic fire of Rudra, basically. If you that name.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, Bhairava is turned into a tree as a punishment for subduing the Devas, and I believe he is later released from that form by Shiva. But it shows this conflict in the Irish tradition. Goll he comes into conflict, feuding with Finn after he kills one of Finn's sons in a fight, and he is then hunted down by Finn to basically an island or some craggy rock island, I think, and basically Finn is watching for him, and he just stays there until he dies. Goll does, and so basically Finn, there's a conflict between them, and it leads to Finn basically causing the death of Goll. So it could be a similar pattern there as well. So I think the only other thing I really wanted to say that I can think of was just, re-emphasizing that Goll's name means one-eyed. Literally, he is clearly an important aspect of the sort of Rudra type of the Gaels. He is, with his one-eyed emphasis, and he gets one eye poked out. He is clearly has an intense parallel to like Odin, for example. So he very much aligns with that, and you can see that perhaps the title of Igor could be sort of an equivalent of what Goll is for the Celts, for the Gaels rather. And then Goll has a myth where where involving the birth of Finn McCool himself, which I think once again he's in a position comparable to sort of a Bhairava, and I want to go into that in a different video. But the other thing is just, Goll is a Fianna leader, a king of the Fianna, just like Finn is in his own right. He doesn't become the high king like Finn does of the Fianna, but he is a Fianna leader of his own, just like Finn is. And then he pledges fealty to Finn, and becomes part of his, a follower of Finn. But they're kind of, on equal footing in a sense, with Goll obviously a little bit treated as supporting, following Finn. It has a similar situation to Bhairava and Shiva, I think. And then I think we can just take this to seeing what there is in the Germanic sphere, because the only other thing to add from the Celtic that I just really want to hold on to is it has this theme of the Finn lying on the ground in a paralyzed, unmoving state, and all of that stuff that we talked about. But the thing that the Welsh version adds, or preserves rather, that the other one doesn't, is that they're actually seeking the blood of Orddu. So to me, this is some esoteric remnant of something that now, like, why do they need this? Why do they need the blood of Orddu is sort of an open question. But it's very interesting. And to me, it sounds like, if you take this as, of course, Bhairava and Kali are the primary tantric deities. I think you can say that in Shaivism. Sure. And yeah, they are the tantric deities. And so we know that, if Kali is the great goddess, the blood of Orddu, the blood of Kali, so to speak, is some sort of esoteric essence, some sort of power. And we know that tantric rites are about, there was blood, and there was different kinds of blood. And yes, exactly, specifically from the female. who embodied the goddess. And one of the parts of the rite was to use that blood in some ritual.
To consume it.
And so this, I think, this, there is underlying this, the suggestion of ritual, an esoteric resonance, like an allegory or whatever you want to call it, for a tantric rite, and its esoteric
multiple things I have to say about this blood thing. And that whole rite we were just talking about. In one tantra, I think it's described as when you when you drink the menstrual blood in the context of this rite, which makes it a lot different according to just willy-nilly eating tampons. When you drink the menstrual blood, it takes you to the land of the yoginis. Like you experience this divine revelation in terms of tantric rites. And this is also partly like the fact that this blood connections in Irish also makes me question the validity of the claims that like all of Tantra and all of later Hinduism is simply Dravidian in origin.
Well, that's exactly what I want to get to with this whole stream, this whole pattern that emerges is if we have a really well-defined Bhairava, which I think Goll is. I think he's a well-defined Bhairava, and that's what it's trying to tell us. It's not just Rudra. It's not just a different division. It's specifically this duality with Bhairava and Shiva, Goll and Finn. And then we have literally the very black hag. The name has almost been preserved the same, and different aspects about causing the immobilization, all these features of her, and then having to be subdued, and then also on top of that we have. So if we have Bhairava and Kali very well preserved in this confrontation myth, and then you have retrieving her blood, which sounds like you said, it can be drawn directly to this ritual parallel. I don't know how else you can interpret this than just evidence that there could have been this quote unquote what we would describe as a tantric element, a tantric part of the ancient Celtic religion, which therefore has to go back to Proto-Indo-European because it's so far away. It's so specifically preserved in this very similar pattern.
And there are various
I don't know how
we have, in various churches that actually kind of make sense. Like Gnostics as well mirrored tantric rites. I was just talking about this in chat, which was the Marcosians. They would drink menstrual blood and things like that, and they would do these weird sort of like erotic rites at their Eucharist to like replicate this bliss of sensual enjoyment to ultimately get to this higher state of being. But also what I wanted to add in terms of Chamunda and Kali and their relationship with blood is they get like blood drunk off of the demons they kill. They like get so ecstatic and wild that and aroused that they drink the blood of these demons, and it gives them like great power. And like yoginis specifically, who basically are carbon copies of Kali and like these ecstatic wild goddesses. When they get together, and also the matrikas, when they get together, they all like pound their drums ecstatically, like a shamanic trance, so to speak, and they drink the blood of these demons, and they get like power from it. I just wanted to add that.
It's all about blood, all about drawing blood, and then consuming it, and the esoteric power of the blood in specific. So it's hard to know exactly what the quote unquote tantric rituals would have been like, what it consisted of, what type of blood, for example, what associations, and what kind of style it was in the Proto-Indo-European time. But there is some core pattern here. There is some core remnant of a ritual, of a full esoteric meaning and theology about this pattern that goes back to the shared root with the Kali and Shiva and Bhairava mythos, and that's what underlies what we call tantric rites in Hinduism. And there had to be something at that shared root of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And we know that a lot of what we think of as Tantra has similarities and roots in what we see in magical rites within the Atharva Veda and other places too. So within the Vedas themselves, there are things that people have identified as similar and sort of probably at the roots of some of what we think of as Tantra.
It's in almost every other European branch. It's like it's in one of the Merseburg charms, where Odin heals a horse with like basically the same formula that's in the Atharva Veda, and it's recorded in Scotland and Ireland and stuff like that too. So there's some pretty far-reaching comparisons to be made.
Spells, specific spells, quote unquote, so to speak.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so I think this is all supported and really becomes more and more convincing when you look also at the Germanic and even like the Greco-Roman possible parallels who directly parallel this Orddu and this Collin types, that this pattern, you realize that the pattern actually is pretty coherent, consistent, and strong. It's survived with a lot of details in these other places, so it doesn't seem as far-fetched that this would actually have survived with a real ritual practice and esoteric meaning under it in the Celtic version. Even though what we have now is just a fragment, it's just a remnant of what that was in the Celtic tales. There's something larger that was underneath this. So if we could go through the Germanic parallels real quickly, that might kind of support that. Do you have anything to say on the Germanic just to go, or should I start going through some quotes? Or do you have anything to say?
So before you get into the possible Germanic parallels, I just want to say, like, a lot of these different goddesses that you're probably going to go through, like maybe like Spindlehulla and things like that, they're regional, right? So like Perchta is specifically like Austrian Alps, mixture of like some Celtic and Roman vibes in that, because it's it's a melting pot of European cultures. So like I think there's a bunch of different versions of Hulla, but ultimately they're all kind of the same if you pay attention, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I do recommend William Reeves' book, The Wife of Odin, I believe, Odin's Wife, because he goes through that specific thing in a lot of detail. And that's one really helpful part of that book. He has a map on the back of the book that shows the regions and how they're all have separate regions. They're not really like overlapping that much, you know what I mean? So in one region, they'll have a specific name for this goddess, and then you go to another region and that name kind of disappears, and it becomes a different name that is identifiable with the same goddess. But if you don't know that information, it might be confusing why, for example, Hulla and Holda and Perchta and Spindlehulla and Frau Godin are all equated, but these are regional things. You can read up more about that subject. But one of the things to point out is that this goddess seemingly gets the title of Frau Godin. So, and I don't know exactly what region that's from, but that's a regional title as well. And Godin is, of course, a regional name for Woden.
I think
so.
Specifically the Langobard people.
Okay,
I'll look it up though.
Well, I would believe you, but yeah. So there are traditions where this specific goddess is considered as the woman or wife, Frau Godin, the wife of Odin. So we know that Odin's main wife is Frigg, and this is Reeves's argument. We know that Odin's main wife is Frigg, so this is essentially possibly equating Frigg with this other goddess who gets identified with Holda and Holla and Perchta and Berchta.
I just want to bring it up before you get going.
Yeah.
Frau Gauden is from Mecklenburg, which is like kind of Western Germany. Basically, it's a big area. So yeah.
Right. So that's an important one because it at least suggests an esoteric linkage back to Frigg, which, it's arguable, and it's there's other, you could say it's a different wife of Odin or whatever, but it is this supporting piece of evidence pointing back to Frigg, just as Frigg is equivalent to like Shiva's main wife, Sati or Parvati, and then Kali is, in the Hindu tradition, is often identified with Parvati, or Parvati even becomes Kali directly in some tales, actually. And Parvati is given the name. Parvati is given the name Kali because of her black color when she's born in some versions. So there's this thing in the Hindu tradition where Parvati is another form of Kali, just as Durga is another form of Kali. They're one continuous goddess for Hinduism, at least. So this is at least a little bit of suggestive evidence that there could have been this connection as well in the Germanic tradition. But perhaps the most significant thing to point out is with one of the versions, one of the names of this goddess is Frau Holla, and she has two bynames as well. She has two other, epithets of her own, and they are, and I can't pronounce German names, but Dunkel Großmutter, which means the dark grandmother. That's one of her primary names, the dark grandmother, and alternately the Weiße Frau, which means the white lady. Okay, so this goes back to Orddu, means the very black. She's the daughter of Orwen, the very white, right? So we literally have this duality, the white and the black, as two names of the same Frau Holla in this version. In the Welsh version, it's mother and daughter. But of course, we know in the Hindu version, Kali is born from the forehead of Durga in certain versions. So Kali can be presented as a daughter of Durga in that sense, born from her, just as she's also just another face of Durga. And Orddu is the daughter of Orwen, the black, the daughter of the white, and then Frau Holla is both the dark grandmother and the white lady in one. So it draws all this together. We once again have a name that is very directly, like her main name is the dark one, and dark grandmother, Großmutter, it suggests a hag. A hag is just generally, an old woman. And then of course, you have the white lady. It all aligns there.
And then Perchta, specifically like the Austrian Alps version of this same theme, she doesn't even have separate names, right? There's the white Perchta, and then there's the nasty hag looking Perchta. And another really close practitioner standpoint, practitioner comparison that you can make is the Perchtlaufen, the women and men who would dress up in like demon costumes and stuff like that. The women would specifically bare their breasts and paint their faces black and tussle their hair to resemble the black, quote unquote, Perchta, the hag version of her. And then in other instances, you see Perchta in a more as the positive Perchta, which is the white-robed female spirit, or the white shining spirit, with little this. A general theme you'll find with this is, and this makes this whole theme similar to Diana or Artemis, which is virginal youth. She likes having instead of her wild hunt is usually little boys and girls who died in some tragic way, or were even given to Perchta at some point, riding goats and stuff. That's what wild hunt is usually described as opposed to the Odinic wild hunt, where it's dead warriors and things like that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff. And yeah, it says here she's the goddess to whom children who died as infants go. So that's an important role for her. Let me just read through a couple quotes to paint a little bit more of the picture. This is from the Wikipedia description. Hulda's connection to the spirit world through the magic of spinning and weaving is emphasized. So spinning and weaving, it's of Hulda, that's another name of Holla. Spinning and weaving is important. She was considered to ride with witches on distaffs, which closely resemble the brooms that witches are thought to ride. Likewise, Hulda was often identified with Diana in old church documents. So this is going to become important because that is the specific parallel that is relevant in Greco-Roman tradition. But even the old church documents understood this. It was very clear to them that Hulda was the same as Diana. So we should at least take that seriously. And then in some manuscripts, she's called Strigum Hulda, which means the witch Hulda. So she's literally described as a witch, just as they are hags in the Celtic version. And it's said that she appears with a crowd of demons transformed into the likeness of women, riding on certain beasts. So she's doing witchcraft, just like comparable to certain tantric practices.
Yeah.
But then also you have appearing in the records in that same record the Queen of Heaven, whom the people call Frau Hulda. So she's this terrifying witch, but then she's called the Queen of Heaven. It's the same issue where if you just get the simplified version, she appears like a witch, but then all of a sudden you get this incongruous thing, which is that she's called the Queen of Heaven. She's much more than just a witch. She clearly has this connection to, like the other name suggests, being the wife of Odin, being the Queen of Heaven, the beneficent two-sided goddess.
Something I would like to add on that note specifically, which is really telling, is that in the Devi Mahatmya, you have the Devi in her most transcendental form being described as the queen of the devas and also the queen of all of the demons. Just saying, it's like I'm paraphrasing slightly.
Exactly.
So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what Devi is in her full Devi form. But yeah, and then of course Spindle Holla is another form of this. So Holla is Frau Holla, but then there's specifically Spindle Holla, and this quote says, "The Spindle Holla is a sallow old woman with short arms and legs." So that's actually funny because her arms are long in the Gaelic version, but sometimes directly called a hag. Nonetheless, it's still a hag. She appears hooded, characterized by the name Popolhola or Popolhola. Okay, translating as hooded holla, or wearing ragged clothing, as shown by the name variant Zumpeldrula. She also can be seen in old Franconian dress, or generally shaped as a pelt sleeve. The Bohemian Frau Holla is a small and ugly old woman which carries a batch of stinging nettles, and the main activity of the Spilla Holla or Spindle Holla is connected with spinning, for she is the overseer of spinning taboos and a bogey used for spinning children. So again, like I've mentioned, she's over and over connected to spindles and weaving and spinning. That's exactly the magic power that Irnan and her sisters use. Okay, so it's very clear. Irnan and her sisters are spinning, weaving. They're using yarn to weave their magic to cause this paralysis. That is literally the association of Spilla Holla, Spindle Holla, and of just Frau Hulda in general. And that, like you said, once again goes back to Frigg. Frigg also has the association with weaving. So it reinforces the possibility that Frau Hulda is this other side connected to the wife of Odin herself. So that underlies the possibility, that people in Europe still did understand this hag, this black side, to be continuous with the actual main wife of the Ruja type.
And then solidifying this comparison even more is the Norse version of this. While it's not explicitly stated to be Frigga, it's pretty if you look into it deeper, like Thorgurther and Urpa, which is Urpa meaning like dark brown or swarthy, I think, are a pair of goddesses that come to the aid of Hakon in one saga, where he sacrifices his little boy to Thorgurther in order to sway the tide of war against the Jomsviking, who he is trying to defend himself against. And that's also like, I mean, of course, like a little boy fits in with this narrative of Frauhola taking like children, basically. And then Thorgurther is like described as like very bright, and in one description of her temple, it said that no shadows can be seen. So she's obviously like the white parallel, and then you have Urpa, who's the darker one, who goes along with that. And she's also like Thorgurther is also the bride of the nobleman, right? Which is telling for an inner tradition in like Norse stuff. With you could say that the reason like Germanic society shifted more so towards like kings being the administrators of rights instead of the Gothies is because they had this very strong noble tradition. You would see you could see it as like a Thorgurther is the Frigg to each king, right? Kings are microcosmically in the same places as Woden, right? So having Thorgurther as his spiritual wife is sort of the same thing, and yeah, it goes along with like a whole microcosmic pantheon, I would say, but that's more speculation on my part.
Yeah, no, that's a great point though. With Thorgurther, there are these other echoes or parallels or just variants within the sagas, right, and within different texts that suggest the same type, right, same pattern. And then it is interesting, this theme of hag riding, because in another place I saw this translated as trampled, but hag road, because, for example, Hold was hired to kill the Swedish king by hag riding him to death by his wife. Just like this trampling or hag riding, I just wonder if it has anything as a parallel to Kali standing on Shiva once again.
So,
okay.
I'll get into that right now.
Trampling, like literally trampling is the other.
So there's also an erotic
translations
to it, right? Like
there is, but that's there in the. We should say that is there in even the trampling of Shiva.
Yes,
that is, it's a double image of an erotic image, which with the same significance.
Role is the main thing there.
Yes.
So
the immobile male, the immobile Shiva.
Yeah. Most
we
of
see
the time
that.
Shiva in more like explicitly tantric context. Most of the time, Shiva is described as a corpse who Kali is whirling on his linga and.
Yeah, exactly. So he is the pillar linga.
Yeah. So
precisely.
Yeah, and then in medieval times, Renaissance, and even before that, probably we have instances of like legit sleep paralysis, but like a demon riding the dude to completion, let's say, and stealing like his energy. So like sapping him of energy in the way that you could only do erotically.
Yeah. Well, that's important to point out because it does appear as this concept of hag road that clearly has certain connotations, but it could go back to the same sort of shared tradition about, the Rudra type, Shiva type, at the feet of, immobilized at the feet of the hag, as in the Celtic versions or in the Hindu version. So I think it is important to point that out.
You even have Hebrew comparisons with Lilith, and it's real bad to the Hebrew culture that Lilith was the first woman I think Adam actually slept with, and she took the dominant position. So that was
I've heard of that.
Taboo thing for Hebrew culture was non-missionary.
I never thought of
So
I definitely never thought of that in this comparison, but that's really interesting. That would be really interesting if that's if that's why that happened in the Hebrew tradition, and it's just been misunderstood. But could go back to something like this. So the only other thing I wanted to just mention is that we then have Diana / Artemis. So Diana is just the Roman goddess who is equated with Artemis, the Greek Artemis, and then you have Hecate, and Hecate is a more sort of witch-like goddess. I think that's accurate to say.
I would say magical and associated
underworld.
Associated with the initiatic aspects of like womanhood, I would say, but in a magical sense, definitely witchcrafty. Definitely.
Yeah, witchcrafty underworld. So this this quote I've just found, it says, the name Hecate was used as a name for Diana in the underworld. She was the goddess of the night and of necromancy, accompanied by her baying hounds of hell. So she is a more underworld, more frightening perhaps goddess, but she, in the tradition, what I wanted to point out is that we have Artemis / Diana. Artemis is clearly the twin of Apollo. So she's like the other side of Apollo, the Rudra type. And we've shown in other parallels that even though she's the twin, she can also parallel the spouse of that Rudra type, for example, or consort. For example, Artemis parallels the unnamed consort of Finn in the Men in the Tree story. And in Hindu tradition, Rudrani is the female name of Rudra, and Shiva is the female name of Shiva, and they are used interchangeably as epithets, as equivalents of Parvati, basically, more or less. These concepts run together, and it could go back to the fact that there's this male-female Ardhanarishvara, which is Shiva and Parvati, or Shiva and his female side, as one male-female hermaphroditic super deity up, higher up, and then they split apart to then become consorts later in the form of Parvati and Shiva. So they can be represented as just the female side of Rudra, or as his spouse, and these concepts can be used interchangeably. That's all I want to say. And therefore Artemis is like equivalent of, for example, Frigg, or can be directly aligned with Frigg or Parvati, etc. And what were you going to say?
So did you bring up Hecatos, which is the male version of Hecate?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, and Hecatos is the name for Apollo. But also on that note, what I want to bring up.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah.
There's Birched. There are Berxt, which is the male version of Birchta, who's the same. It's Odin more or less, and you have it
right,
and then Birchta. But another thing I want to
add. Oh
yeah. One more thing that's going to be kind of fun for us. In Hebrew language texts, the term Lilith or Lilith is translated as night creatures, night monster, night hag, or screech owl. And then another thing here, commentators and interpreters often envision the figure of Lilith as a dangerous demon of the night who is sexually wanted and who steals babies in the darkness.
Whoa. Okay. Even association with children.
Yep.
Like the deceased children associated. Well, it's at least an interesting connection. Who knows what that?
Yeah.
But that is very suggestive.
It is.
So yeah, is there anything else about? This is something I would like to ask Josephus more, but just details about. I know the connection between Diana and Hecate was very just emphasized. It was just very well established, is what I wanted to say. In Greco-Roman tradition, they just considered them two faces, and they made them into like three-faced statues and things like that. I think where they're just being equated as faces of one another. Diana Triformis, yeah, that's right. So there's Diana Triformis, which is Diana, Luna, and Hecate as one triple goddess. So they really
believed in this equation, and it could be the exact same thing that we see with Frigg versus Frau Holla, or Sive, the wife of Finn, versus Irnan, or Cradelad, the wife of Gwyn, versus Orddu. Okay, so it's this same equation, and what it does is it gives us more evidence that in Europe they knew this esoteric equation, which is heavily emphasized in Hinduism. They believed in that clearly, that equation of those two. But you have to kind of put all the pieces side by side in the European picture to really prove that they actually knew this esoteric underlying connection, at least. And it was a big part of especially the Greco-Roman tradition, and then traces in these other ones.
And specifically with Hecate and Hecatos, Hecatos is like the male, is obviously the male version of Hecate, right? But he's associated with Apollo in the same form that Diana is associated with Hecate. And he oversees the initiation of like young boys into like that same type of magical like practice, like into like male witchcraft, I guess. I don't like the term witchcraft.
Right.
I feel like it's a little played out, but yeah, it's basically
yeah. Well, like we were saying, European Tantra, essentially, that's what the Celtic version suggests, is that there was, it wouldn't be called that, of course, and there would be differences. Don't get me wrong. There's going to be differences, and there are things that only developed in the Hindu version, I'm sure. But it's going back to this sort of transgressive black hag associated version that is connected to blood, that's connected to underworld type things, as we see with Hecate. So look at Hecate for probably good examples of what that type of association and type of esoteric tradition might have been connected to.
Also, more on this Lilith thing is she's related etymologically to a Mesopotamian demon lady known as Lamashtu. And like there's some strong Mesopotamian parallels with like Kali and this hag figure as well. There's also Persian, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But
yeah, we can get into that at another point. I think I do have to go. I got to go have lunch, and this is a perfect ending point. Is there any final thoughts on that you want to add, or other information that we left out?
Well, I mean, I just can't stress enough how important I think Thorgurther and Urpa are, because it's a very clear Norse depiction of it, and we have a lot on it. I just
and the source for that is, what's the source?
Okay, I can pull up the sources right now. Yeah, Feringa Saga is a good one. That's the one where it goes through the temple and like the devotion to Thorgurther that they have. And then Jomsviking Saga, and there's actually quite a bit. There's Njal Saga, Skaldskaparmal, Harðar Saga, Ok Holmverja. There's a lot.
Okay.
It all has to do with
well, that's perfect.
So it's really useful as well. But yeah,
that's important. I think that's important material to look at. And the only thing I want to stress at the end is don't underestimate the amount of conserved detail in these traditions, especially that there could be this trace of this quote unquote tantric tradition going back. It points to going back to Proto-Indo-European times, and why not? Also, why shouldn't that have been the case? It would have been its own version with its own forms. But yeah, and then lastly, just retrieving the blood of Orddu. So just meditate on the meaning of that for yourself, I guess.
Possibly of interest, some tellings of the Kali myth say that Shiva was seeking the grace of Kali's foot and received it when she placed it on his chest. This makes me wonder if the grace of Kali could in any way parallel the blood essence of Orddu that Gwyn and Arthur seek, since at least this portrays both Shiva and the Welsh pair as questing to receive something from the terrible female. Of course, other things besides the foot or the grace of Kali can hold this position as the thing received from the terrible goddess, including her blood, her mantras, etc. So not only does this goddess exist in Europe, but she is called the Dark Grandmother, or Very Black, just as Kali is called Ma Kali, Black Mother, or Dark Mother. And I've always thought it an interesting coincidence that Hala and Kali are so phonetically similar. This is probably a coincidence on the linguistic level, but the name of Frau Holda literally means graceful. So it's also interesting that Shiva seeks the grace of Kali's foot in some interpretations. Kali is then depicted as the great giver of grace.
And that's all I've got. All right, I gotta head out and get some lunch. And that was perfect. That was covered everything I wanted to in my scattered brain here. So, but
we interrupted.
Thanks for
a lot, but it was good.
Yeah, thanks for how much you brought to that. That you brought a ton to that. That was like just perfect, fantastic.
Yeah, it's the one topic I know like about.
No, I know. I was loving it. I was loving hearing the things you had to bring. So, all right, man. Thanks for talking, and I'll talk to you later. Okay.
Yep. See ya.
Please check out my Patreon if you would like to support the channel and see all of the important topics I have in mind get made into videos, as well as supporting the completion of my second book, Briochan's Tower, in which many mysteries will be solved. My book, Taliesin's Map, is available from Amazon. Link in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe for more as we map the myths.